Welcome to the Explainer. So, if you've ever found yourself staring at a shiny, brand new AI proposal and secretly wondering, okay, but when is this actually going to start delivering value? Well, trust me, you are absolutely not alone. I was digging into this exact topic recently and it hit me. We desperately need to decode the true timeline for implementing AI in the enterprise. Today, we're unpacking a really pragmatic, brilliant framework from AI strategist Mu Niao. It completely separates the marketing myths from the reality of deployment. Let's get right into it. How long will this actually take? Look, it is the burning question every single business leader asks the moment an enterprise AI initiative kicks off. And rightfully so, right? But here's the incredibly frustrating catch. It rarely gets a straight answer. Usually you get a vague, well, it depends, followed by a lot of nervous throat clearing. Today, we are doing much better than it depends. We're going to break down exactly what it depends on, stage by stage, so you know exactly what to expect. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap today. We're covering the timeline myth, foundation and pilot, build and scale, a timeline summary, accelerators and speed bumps, and we'll wrap up with the leadership conversation. First up, Section 1, the timeline myth. Let's dismantle some of the wildly unrealistic expectations floating around out there. Okay, be honest. Have you seen those hyper-aggressive vendor claims promising a full AI deployment in just 30 days? Let's drop the hammer on that right now. No way. 30 days might get you a software installation. Sure, it gets you a system that technically turns on, maybe a basic wrapper around a language model. But listen closely. A technical deployment is absolutely not the same thing as business value. You simply cannot compress data prep, human change management, and security governance into a single month. It just doesn't happen in the real world. So there's this massive, stark contrast between what is promised and what is actually required. On one side, you've got vendor or pilot timelines. These are essentially technical illusions. They cover getting the software running in a highly controlled, tightly scoped little sandbox. But on the other side, we have realistic timelines. This is the unglamorous but totally vital reality. We're talking about meticulously cleaning your data, prepping your workforce for a huge shift in their daily workflows, and putting up the necessary guardrails. Taking an AI pilot out of the sandbox and making it a real, sustained operational capability takes real, methodical work. Which brings us nicely to Section 2, Foundation and Pilot. This is where the journey really kicks off. Mu Niao's framework lays this whole thing out in 4 chronological stages. It moves really logically, laying a foundation, running a pilot, the heavy lifting of build and deploy, and finally out to scale and optimize. Let's zoom in closely on those first 2 critical stages right now to see what's actually happening under the hood. So stage 1 is the foundation, and it typically takes 2 to 3 months. This is where the messy, behind-the-scenes work of data audits, readiness assessments, and governance design happens. And I found a massive cautionary takeaway here. Do not skip this stage. It is consistently the most underinvested phase, but rushing it just to say you deployed faster? Total trap. Companies that skip the foundation inevitably spend vastly more time and money unpicking the consequences of building on a broken base later. You are literally just pre-ordering technical debt. Next is stage 2, the pilot. This takes another 2 to 3 months. Now, notice the difference here between a good pilot and a bad one. A good pilot runs for a strict 60 to 90 days with very specific predefined success criteria. It gives you a clean, honest conclusion. A bad pilot, it drags on indefinitely. The goalposts keep magically moving, and companies often push it to deployment anyway because of the sunk cost fallacy. That feeling of, well, we've already spent too much to stop now. A successful pilot requires you to look at the results honestly, not just invent excuses for a decision you've already made. Moving right along to Section 3, build and scale. Let's step out of the lab and into the real world. Stage 3, build and deploy, spans 3 to 6 months. And let me tell you, it is heavily resource intensive. You're tackling production-grade integrations with legacy systems, locking down strict governance controls, and conducting rigorous user training. And honestly, user training almost always takes longer than you think because you are fundamentally changing human behavior. Oh, and speaking of the rollout, doing a phased approach instead of a massive big bang launch usually adds 4 to 8 weeks. But identifying critical issues early on a smaller group, that time trade-off is absolutely worth it. Finally, we hit stage 4, scale and optimize. And this takes anywhere from 6 to 18 months or honestly, even longer. Scaling is so often misunderstood by leadership. It's not just buying a bunch more software licenses. It is fundamentally about building durable infrastructure. We're talking continuous model monitoring, feedback loops, and robust support channels. Your pace here is actually constrained by your organization's capacity to absorb change, not the technology itself.
All right, Section 4, Timeline Summary. Let's pull all these threads together.
When you add up the math from the foundation, the pilot, and the build and deploy phases, the bottom line is actually quite sobering. The total time for just your first successful scaled use case is realistically 9 to 15 months. And remember, that's assuming your organization has a moderate baseline of readiness. If you are looking at a fully scaled program across multiple interconnected use cases, you're realistically looking at 18 to 36 months to achieve genuine enterprise transformation. Let's pivot to Section 5, accelerators and speed bumps. What actually changes that timeline? So what speeds this all up? Well, mature data infrastructure and clear use cases are obvious accelerators, but the most fascinating variable to me is dedicated resources. Having an AI implementation run by a dedicated, focused team makes the process roughly twice as fast as relying on people who are juggling the project as a little side-of-desk task alongside their regular day jobs. Strong executive sponsorship also acts like a machete, cutting right through corporate red tape. And external expertise can guide you safely if your team is totally new to this. But now for the hard truths. The speed bumps. Scope creep, unexpected vendor delays, and underinvesting in change management will all drag your project down. But the absolute nightmare scenario? Discovering data problems mid-project? If data quality issues that should have been caught in that foundation stage suddenly surface during the build phase? Oof. You are looking at weeks or even months of painful, unplanned remediation work that will just completely destroy your timeline and your budget. And let's be real, your organization's overall size heavily dictates the calendar too. A large enterprise might take up to 24 months for a first scaled deployment, mostly because of complex, heavily audited governance layers and just highly fragmented legacy tech. Mid-market companies are looking at around 18 months, while smaller scale-ups might pull it off in 12. Interestingly, while smaller companies have way less red tape, they often lack the internal bandwidth, which ironically becomes their own main speed constraint. And finally, Section 6, the leadership conversation. How do we actually talk to the boss about all this? When leadership inevitably pushes you for faster results, and they will, it is absolutely critical that you lead with the cost of cutting corners. You have to explain very clearly that shortcuts don't actually accelerate value. Bowing to pressure for a faster timeline usually results in a massive remediation cost down the line, and that cost far exceeds whatever time or money those shortcuts supposedly saved in the first place. Which brings us to the true philosophical core of Moonyu's framework. Turning the software on, technically, that is not the finish line. Flipping the switch is easy. The metric that truly matters is when the specific business outcome the AI was designed to deliver is actually achieved. If leadership is only focusing on deployment dates and arbitrary go-live calendars, they are literally measuring the wrong thing entirely. Which leaves us with this crucial, slightly provocative question to shift your mindset entirely. Are you measuring deployment dates or are you measuring business value? It's a fundamental distinction and it's going to dictate the success or failure of your entire AI initiative. Keep this front and center as you plan your timelines and you'll be light years ahead of the competition. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I hope you found it as incredibly useful as I did, and I'll catch you on the next one.